Years ago, in the parish in Breckenridge, this was before I was ordained. This was before I was even in discernment. There was a man that was a part of that faith community who was hard to love. He was a proud man. He was a large man. 6'5", 6'6", maybe when he was younger. He had an opinion for everything, and he was loud when he shared it. He expected everyone to appreciate and value what he had to say. And he always seemed to think that he was right. And everyone else just didn't recognize his value and his wisdom. Over time, many just tried to avoid this person. Stay out of his way. Avoid conversations. But in small churches, big voices take up lots of space and lots of energy. And his did. Someone asked his wife about her husband, and she remarked, "Well, I have 2 lists. One list contains all those things that aggravate me and embarrass me and frustrate me and others about my husband, Bill. That's the list everyone knows. And I have another list that reminds me of all the qualities that very few people ever get to experience and see. That he is generous, and he is compassionate, and he is protective, and he is caring. When I've had enough of the first list," Shirley said, "I say to Bill, stop. And he knows he has stepped beyond my good graces and everyone else's good graces as well. He might grumble a bit, but he stops." One thing everyone could always see, and I was struck by it, was how much Bill and Shirley loved each other. I just wondered why he seemed to be so hard on everyone else. One day at the grocery, he stopped me, and he began to complain about the new priest that was at our church. He was upset that the priest wanted to have communion before the vestry meeting started. Not coming from a sacramental background myself, communion wasn't an integral part of my earlier life. He thought that he would have, I wasn't on the vestry at the time either. He thought he might have someone who would agree with him. And he said in his large voice, he was there for the business of the church and not communion. I listened to this large man fuming between the vegetables and the fruit. And before I could stop, knowing it was against my better judgment, I looked at this large older man and I said to him, "Bill, the priest just wants to change what has become the moose lodge with a cross on top back into the church. I agree with the priest. You should start with communion." The conversation was over, as Bill left feeling unheard in his wisdom. In the midst of all of this, our son became very ill. Not the kind of ill that you can have an operation for and fix, but nonetheless life-threatening and life-robbing. He couldn't work. He couldn't drive. He wouldn't leave his room for days, even weeks. He had scary dreams, scary thoughts, And what was left of life was miserable. One Saturday night, it got to the point that we had to take our son back to the hospital that would protect him and keep him safe. It was several hours to that hospital each way. On Sunday morning, Charlotte and I slid into the pew behind Bill and Shirley, and they turned around and they noticed that our son was not with us. And they asked where he was. We said, he's back in the hospital. And they knew enough to know that was not good. Bill turned away, and then when he turned back to look at us again, tears were falling off of his chin. He said, "We will drive you back to the hospital because we know you are tired and wore out. We will help you. Let me help you. What can I do?" When our son came back, Bill was there, and he spent time with our son, and he had energy to be with our grown son. He taught our son how to play cribbage. He asked him to walk the distance between our house and theirs, knowing that it would be a challenge for everyone in that distance that he would have to walk through the woods. Bill began to love our son, and through our son began to love us. And we began to love Bill. But Bill was always Bill with those two lists. One had the words aggravate, embarrass, frustrating, prideful. The other list was now recognized as Bill's list as well. It had generous, compassionate, protective, caring. The world says what really counts are riches, records, and reputations. Jesus says that what really counts are relationships. But as you know, relationships are costly. There is a sacrifice of time to even establish a relationship. There is time that's required to foster a relationship. There's the sacrifice of energy required to keep a relationship going and to sustain it and to work at it. But even before those things, sometimes there is the sacrifice of pride required to even establish a relationship. Tonight, on this Holy Thursday, we're encouraged to remember who we are. That we all have two lists. The emphasis of the words of Jesus tonight are not loving others as we love ourselves, but loving others like Jesus loved us. Mother Teresa wrote, "God's love is infinite, full of tenderness, full of compassion. God loves the world through us, you and me, the way in which you touch people, the way in which you give to people, the way that you demonstrate love for one another. That's how God loves the world, through us. That is the incarnation of God's love in action." The University of Duke's ethicist Stanley Hauerwas finds that most practiced Christianity is far too spiritual. He writes, Christianity is not a set of beliefs or doctrines one believes, but rather Christianity is to have one's body shaped, one's habits determined in such a way that the worship of God is unavoidable. You can't help but worship God through others and to others. At this last meal together, a meal that they had shared often before, after 3 years of living and learning together with all the conceptual truths at his fingertips, all of the nuggets of wisdom that Jesus had given to people for 3 years, Jesus doesn't leave them with something to think about. He doesn't eliminate the good list folks from the bad list folks. Jesus gives them something to do. Love one another. Use me, Jesus says, as the example, as your example. Remember me as you love one another. Let my love for you inspire you to love one another. So tonight we come here and we all come with our lists. Some more public and known than others. And we come in the midst of life shared and life sheltered, and we participate as flawed human beings. This isn't about being good, but about being good for something. It's about doing God's love, which will change our being.